Mr. Jimmy Gutierrez.
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the public. At the last city council meeting held on October 2nd, 2012, Mr. Mcgroarty stated that he discovered specific violations of the City of Chino's Code of Conduct, and he requested an investigation by the district attorney. Since that time, I have analyzed his allegations by studying them carefully, making reference to the city codes and state codes, and pouring through piles and piles of the council members' 700 forms, which is their statement of economic interest, and their 460 forms, which is a statement of their campaign contributions and expenditures, so that I can understand what's going on, including obtaining some information from the Air Quality Management District to understand the process that went through that was discussed by Mr. Mcgroarty. So having done that, I prepared an analysis, and my analysis starts by pointing out that Mr. Mcgroarty made 5 allegations, and I want to take each one, explaining what he said, and then giving you my findings as to each one of those. So the first one was as follows. He stated that in 2004, Mayor Yates requested 2 positions to work for him as a board member of the Air Quality Management District, which I'll refer to as AQMD, that those positions were not open to the public, and then Mayor Yates appointed Earl Alrod, council member, and Bob Ulloa, the spouse of Councilwoman Eunice Ulloa. Then he stated that those positions with the AQMD make council members Alrod and Ulloa dependent upon the mayor, and that therefore Mayor Yates has a conflict. This allegation is not supported for several reasons. First of all, this allegation as to the appointment has nothing to do with Mayor Yates or council members Alrod and Ulloa as officials of the city of Chino. Instead, the allegation is really about the AQMD and its hiring practices as set forth in the letter from AQMD's Executive Director, Barry Wallerstein, dated October 5, 2012. Since Mayor Yates did not recommend Mr. Elrod or Mr. Ulloa for employment by the City of Chino, and the council did not hire Mr. Elrod or Mr. Ulloa, no provision of the City Code of Conduct or the State Conflict of Interest Code was involved, let alone violated. Second, and this is important, the Code of Conduct was approved as a policy. Therefore, none of the allegations can be violations of that code and are not subject to investigation by the district attorney. I didn't stop there. Instead, I considered the allegations as they may apply under the state's conflict of interest statute. And so I turn to that now. Unfortunately, I'm going to give you a little bit of law, but only as a background for what I'm going to say, because I think it's important to understand why the allegations that Mr. Mcgroarty made do not constitute conflicts of interest. So let me begin that process. I hope not to bore you. California's conflict of interest code requires the existence of city council action and a financial financial interest as a basis of a conflict. An example is this one, and this is something everybody knows. When a Chino council member owns property in Chino, such a council member must disclose the property in his statement of economic interest and must refrain from any participation in any city project within 500 feet of his or her property. So the commandment of the code is simple. Where property or money is involved, no participation is permitted. Where property or money is not involved, participation is required. Here, no action was suggested by Mayor Yates, and no action was taken by the City Council. So now I turn to Mr. Yates' involvement as a member of the AQMD. Mr. Yates informed me that his statement of economic interest filed with the AQMD do not identify financial contributions to him from either Mr. Elrod or Mr. Ulloa. Therefore, any recommendation by Mayor Yates to the AQMD to employ Mr. Elrod or Mr. Ulloa cannot constitute a conflict of interest in his position as an AQMD board member. And I'm going to read to you what the actual state law says. This is in Government Code Section 87,100. It says as follows. No public official at any level of state or local government shall make, participate in making, or in any way attempt to use his official position to influence a governmental action in which he knows he has a financial interest. And then another code section, 87103, defines a financial interest. And I'm not going to go through it all, but just to give you an example, financial interest is having an interest in a business entity worth more than $2,000, real estate worth more than $2,000, or being an official or a director in a corporation within the 12 months prior to the time a decision was made. Then we go to Government Code Section 82030, which is very important because it defines income. And in its definition of income, it makes reference to various types of revenues. But it explicitly excludes campaign contributions, and most importantly, it excludes salary or expense reimbursement received from a state, local, or federal government agency. These provisions make it abundantly clear that the State Conflict of Interest Code requires the existence of a financial interest, excluding income from a local agency such as AQMD or the IUA, and an action involving that financial interest. These are fundamental to a conflict of interest. Without them, there can be no conflict of interest. This takes me to the second allegation. Mr. McGroarty then alleges that Councilmember Elrod has a conflict of interest because he serves as the city's representative to the Regional Sewage Policy Committee, and because Mrs. Elrod is employed by the Inland Empire Utility Agency, or the IUA. Now, these allegations also are unsupported. First of all, Councilman Elrod does not have a policy-making position over the IUA. Instead, Mr. Elrod is a member of a committee that advises the IUA on its treatment of wastewater from the West End cities under a contract between the IUA and the West End cities. Second, Mr. Elrod's income from her employment by the IUA does not constitute a financial interest. Mr. Elrod's position on the committee does not call upon him to make any decision that would affect his wife's employment with the IUA. Therefore, the fundamental elements for a conflict are not present. The third allegation is this. Mr. McGroarty alleges a second conflict of interest, this time by both Mr. Elrod and Mrs. Elrod, on the sole basis that Mrs. Elrod has earned income from unspecified fundraising activities. However, he does not describe the action taken by Mrs. Elrod in her position as a public information officer for the IUA that involves any source of such fund. Likewise, he does not describe the action taken by Mr. Elrod in his capacity as a city council member involving any source of those funds. Given this lack of information, there's an important question to be asked, and that is, what is the conflict? Mr. McGroarty must show that an action taken by Mrs. Elrod or Mr. Elrod that involved a source of fundraising funds within the last 12 months of the receipt of their funds. If Mr. McGroarty is alleging that Council Member X's payment to Mrs. Elrod for work on his campaign constitutes a financial interest, then he also must show that Councilman Elrod or Mrs. Elrod made or influenced a governmental decision on a matter pertaining to that Council Member X. Without such a showing, Mr. McGroarty's allegation that Mayor Yates condoned a conflict cannot stand. So again, we ask the question, what is the conflict? What is it that Mayor Yates condoned? There is no answer to that question because there is no basis to the allegation that's being made. The allegation that one is employed by the IUA just doesn't cut it because income from a public entity is not considered a financial interest. Let's go to the fourth allegation. Mr. McGroarty states that the Chino City Council members have to do more than disclose their financial interests. He asserts that they cannot ignore other provisions of the Conflict of Interest Code, but he does not explain what provisions have been ignored. Because he does not state them, no further response is necessary. And the final allegation that he makes is that the City Council would normally ask the City Attorney, me, to investigate such allegations, but that my political contributions to Council members have conflicted me and would not allow me to be impartial. The truth of the matter is this: I have never investigated any allegation about a conflict of interest pertaining to a city council member, and the reason's simple. I do not have that authority. Second, a campaign contribution cannot be the basis of a conflict of interest. So I conclude by saying this: because I find no merit to Mr. McGroarty's allegations, I cannot recommend the City Council request the District Attorney to investigate them. That concludes my report, Mayor and members of the Council.
Thank you.